Hello. Today I would like to walk you through basic steps helping a student play a Nocturne by Chopin. Of course, the essential is to learn the fingerings around the phrasing, of which you make sure that the student plays also understands the right harmonization and then the quality of legato of the melody. But more than all, you have to start at the beginning, getting to understand the score. If we take this first phrase of the right hand's melody, aria bel canto style, we have to make sure that the student is aware that the meter, which is 12/8 for each, therefore bar 12/8 notes, goes by at least 4 bar of 12/8 melodic bridge arching, which leads to the tonic E flat, where I stop to play. Of course, the two hands could have played the melody. But Chopin uses a two-hand approach to the left hand's accompaniment of this melody. And he does that very often. You have a bass note, which is the root, if not most of the time so some kind of a melodic bass line, and then the harmonization. And so naturally the pedaling of the right foot covers the melodic leap of the intervals, which are uniquely melodic, therefore not to be held together. But and you don't have a right foot pedal for half of the keyboard, as if you had another half of the keyboard for a pedal-less melody, finger legato, finger pedal, for which you have to accept to perhaps lose the bass note when you play the harmony and replay it again and refetch it from close-up inside the keys to play softer the harmonic and bass line, compared to the soaring melody, which of course uses the beautiful operatic leap of the ascending sixth, ascending octave, with a turn which delays it for the effect. Then after the trill, more like a vibrato, you return to conclude this fourth bar. So you went highest note D, the leading tone, since we're in E flat major, and also is a 10th after the 6th, the octave, and the 10th. The intervals of the melody stretch exponentially, and the importance of these leaps needs to be played as a vibrato portato, as if a violin would slide on the board, or the voice. And so I advise the student to hold the lower note when you play the top note, and then let the top note appear alone. If it makes you add a little bit of time in order to have still the 3/8 notes of the dotted quarter, which is the high G, 2, 3, 1, so be it. Of course, the rubato is always problematic because nobody agrees. If at least they do that, you might need it. The question is how much. So I would say that the best advice is to say that if you overstay the legato to prepare the leap, and then the melody has the single note left, then you have to add at least almost an eighth note. Well, perhaps 16th note. And then what follows is step motion. And step motion without that leap becomes more mundane, it's more natural flow, as tension after the leap, the release in the step motion. So that's why I suggest that you take more time to prepare the leap and then catch back the tempo in the eighth notes of the step motion. Then take the time to expressively bring the top note in the leap. And then in the trill, gain the tempo, back to faster, well, less slow, flowing, and then take your time. Most likely, most hands cannot reach the 10th and hold it. So this one will have to be pedal held. Whenever this and these can be finger held. In this way, you organize yourself so that the left hand, which has these two hands playing the left hand, the bass line and the harmonization, they benefit from the harmonization of the pedal. So you will only put and change the pedal once the melodic note, in this case the G of the top, is alone. This way still have the harmony and the bass note in the left hand under the pedal, but you don't have the interval as a two-held sound, rather as a leap of a single voice. Then comes the third factor that you want to tell a student, which is Corto's example of expression of the valorization of the melodic note by not aligning it with the bass note as written in the score, but rather play slightly after the bass note, perhaps between the upbeat and then the bass note. Of course, you can do it more tightly or almost seamless, but not. Cortot used to think that in this case the melodic note and the bass note played together cancel each other. Whenever slightly displayed on its own, you hear the blossoming of the melodic line's note, while you still hear the harmonization and the bass note. Of course, Chopin didn't have a middle pedal which could have held the E flat and then have the chords almost detached and hold the bass note with the third pedal, middle pedal. But it didn't stop him from writing it, knowing that pianists don't have three hands. And of course, he didn't have a middle pedal that was allowing to separate, a sostenuto pedal as we call it, to separate what you hold from what else you're going to hold. In other words, it gives you an extra compartmentation. But in fact, the problem is that the resonances overlap with the dampers, the 88 keys, and it becomes more wet, more a little fuzzy compared to the precision of the timbre of the melody that is unadulterated single note out of 88 that is held by the finger and not the pedal of the right foot putting all the dampers up, so you hear wah 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 wah, but ti ti ta, and not ti wah. But sorry for having sung, it's bad habit even if I try to get rid of it. So the rubato is here more organic rather than added as an effect. It's more about allowing the leap of the melodic line rising to have this little extra time where you don't just hear the two sounds, but you hear them, and then the bass note disappears to let the melody alone in the top. And recatch the tempo, but very discreetly, not at once, in the trill or the step motion. So one can also argue very logically that each leap, 6th, octave, 10th, could be a little wider progressively. So not all leaps should be the same slow, and not all the passing tones or step motion notes after that should be the same either, meaning in tempo, because it becomes then a little bit of a unnatural flow. You have a stopping, and then a forward, then stop and forward. Of course, that's too drastic. And of course, the problem with the examples is that they're always exaggerations, at least in my case, because I want to, prove my point. But in fact, if I play it and I don't teach it, I have to try to signal to the audience through the artistic expression of Chopin also a little bit of the pedagogical aspect of the readability of the text, of the leap and the bass notes, slightly paused before the melody's top note. Now it's very possible to play it with the same expression but without the rubato and just do. And to tell you the truth, I like it too, perhaps even better. The problem with the rubato is that as soon as you try to get out of the tracks, you start perhaps drifting away. It's always hard to play slower because it makes you slower down. It makes you slow down. There's no virtue to playing it metronomically either, because it's imitative of the bel canto arias where the sopranos were improvising a lot of those vocalises. Again, apologies. It escaped me that I sang. Sounds so not right. It's not a singer. But in denial, pianists hope they can sing with the right hand. But the left hand is percussive, and we try to stay inside the keys in order to avoid the sense of articulation, percussion. So comes the fingering and the tempo. So the modern piano allows us to have longer decay for a held sound. So let's say the high G has to last 4/8 notes, 3 of the dotted quarter plus the tie over the delayed suspension on the next bar. Therefore, if you play it very beautifully soft, it keeps decaying, and you're obliged to play louder the resolution, the F. Had you not planned to play the G louder at the get-go, it has room to decay, and you pick up the exit at the level of the decay for the next 8th note, which is in fact the 5th, 8th note after the first 4 held by the G. So if you're a singer, you calculate your breath, and you don't want to breathe between, let's say, syllables of a word that you sing. If you're a woodwind instrument player or brass, you have to calculate the tempo according to the phrasing of the musical aspect of the piece and where you should breathe in order not to make a breathing in the middle of something important, but plan ahead. You cannot just start and hope to last. And therefore, when you play chamber music, let's say even a string player with a pianist, the bow length is important for how long and slow you can, without starting, of course, to, I guess, shake. Add how many notes in which tempo in a single bow. The pianists don't think about it because the instrument, with or without the right foot pedal, allows for a very stretched, slow tempo. So probably on a Chopin time piano, this would be a little bit dropping before the connection becomes fluid. So even if it's peaceful and calm and so expressive while very pastoral, you can implement a calm feeling in a walking forward tempo, trying to avoid accents that unexpectedly will become bumps or halls if they don't speak. And because Chopin adds unmeasured articulation of decorative patterns, then of course they have to be played faster in order to fit the general pace. So because you can play it slower, should you? I think that's a question of finding out the flow of the harmonic change every dotted quarter. That's the coating. And the melody, not played too loud in order to be still very tender and dolce or sweet. That's a little flexibility of taking your time, but not too much, for the leaps of the melody and then catching it up, because rubato means stealing, so it would be some kind of virtuous theft, where what you take extra, you return here. So your overall structure is still holding in terms of architectural symmetry. Of course, the rubato is not indicated in the score. The dolce is, which means that you cannot play too loud the right hand because dolce is tender or sweet. So you have to take in account how loud, how fast, or how slow, how legato or over legato, how pedaling or no pedaling or little pedaling for which notes, which can hold compared to if the stretch of the hand doesn't allow or does allow. And then how much to place in slight unfitting togetherness a bass note and the melodic note. And should you do it every downbeat, or perhaps in the case of the melodic line arch, a lot is happening. So it is highly decorated, plus ornamented and expressive in the sense of bringing out the expression, not impressive inside. Express from ex, the Latin suffix, prefix rather, for out. And therefore you have to bring out. You cannot play sort of shy. That's so beautiful. But expressive, as he writes, plus dolce, some eloquence in the amount of orchestration, imaginary one, for the balance of the instruments. If you had a flute with harp in the orchestration, or pizzicato on the bass, or you had a clarinet, or an oboe, it wouldn't be that louder because the piano has the same sound, but will be thinner or wider from the oboe to the clarinet as a timbre, as a color. And so naturally, the balance between how much you bring out the melody compared to the accompaniment corresponds to what in orchestration you would, almost like a cook cooking the food in the proportions. If you please put a pizzicato on the bass and harp, you secure a very clear, transparent left hand, as Chopin used to say. My right hand ignores what the left hand does, and this way mostly neutral. And then if it's very expressive, the oboe with the more sharp tone in terms of the timbre will bring out more, and if you want it less, then you have to give it to the clarinet. So these orchestral choices you made in a way not only for the color of the tempos but also for the balance. And on the piano you have to also decide if do you want it to be really expressive or not. And then the consequence is there's no more room for the F. To avoid the accent at the exit of the long note. So all these different ingredients are also to do with the fingering. You don't want to use fingers that bend or a thumb that plays flat. That's mostly for the scales. And even so, the thumb should stay a little bit sideways. And I find that when you use two fingers that need to play straight from the knuckle to the tip in order to get that expressive intensity rather than bend, I think then you have to start with 2-5, and then you can do 3-4-3-2 or 3-5-4-2, and then again 2-5, and then you have to do 1-2-1-2-1-5. So that thumb and 5 does the octave, overlap. Then the trill probably 2-3, because you have white keys and two almost equally length fingers. Easier played equal than if you use thumb, which is more or less lying or halfway. To avoid. And anyway, we play them inside the keys. And then 3-2, no, 2-1. You can do a substitution because you want to have the thumb on the black key B flat and 5 on the D. Even if you cannot hold it with a finger because of the stretch, you can do it with a pedal. Unlike so the pedal is also very necessary for these things. It's not just avoid it or overuse it for everything. It's more about the alertness of the touch, allowing you to play very expressively without to smear through the right foot pedal the complete harmonization, bass and melody, nor play dry. But you learn by practicing it dry without pedal, as my generation's teachers used to ask us in lessons. So you do substitutions for the melody, and when you have common tones in the two chords with the inversions in the harmonization on the second, third, eighth note, you learn in order to play it soft not to repeat fully. On the shorter decaying instruments of Chopin, they must have been needing to be replayed so that they hold. And if it was French horns in orchestra, they will hold, and you don't have to repeat them. But you cannot not repeat them because they're written, even if you don't play it on the instrument, nor with the ears of the time. But then again, and the rubato of the time, because people played this music of the time during their time. They didn't have time to think of the style because it was what they were bathing in. Today we have to make sure that we find the correct expression stylistically. So historically in the context, the transmission between and translation before the instrument of Chopin and today's piano in terms of pedal, length of sound, and therefore clarity of the layering, and then at the same time bring it all together. So many elements to take in account to play a simple phrase where it's written with he chose bars to put every 12 eighth notes, but the melodic line surely shouldn't be heard as every 12 notes a downbeat. It's 4 groups of 12 notes in 4 consecutive bars that bring you to this extended, stretched run-on sentence phrase, which is so characteristic for the romantic style of Europe in the 19th century. Liberate yourself from the formal prison, I was going to say. Of course, they didn't get rid of the bar lines, which could look like a prison bar lines if I want to find a cheap analogy. But in fact, nobody will hear them when you perform because they'll hear your melodic line soaring like a bird in the blue sky, and the accompaniment as if somebody else is playing it than yourself. not neutral per se, but uninvolved, except the harmonization minor with a diminished seventh in major. So you have a minor major. It's all harmonic colorization. And if the student doesn't remember all the ingredients to cook them together, so to say, in the sauce, well, there's always the next week and the following week. Or you can play as a teacher to insist on different aspects: the pulse, the tempo, the phrasing, the articulation, the sound, the color, the fingerings, the pedaling, the unichord or not, where and how often, acoustics in the hall, playing on a grand or an upright piano for the action, then low keys being heavier in the action on the modern pianos, especially when you have to play soft, while you have also taken account the cross-string modern pianos that has a homogeneous resonance rather than independent by different ranges. So once you absorb this knowledge, you still have to remain profoundly emotionally intuitive and say, well, I know that, but in fact I like it anyway. Perhaps it's good to be aware of all these elements that I like as a teacher, to bring awareness to the student, but not to the point to which to stop the intuitive musicianship, typically spontaneity. I think it's not possible to say it's one or the other. It should be both. And that is the hardest part for a student, because they have to figure out how to filter that through their student years, or through their teaching years, or through their performing years, through their basically musical career. And it's always a new way that music appears, and differently, in a way, surprising and enchanting and daring. And you have to be always there, attentive, not to over control, but to allow enough to appear just simply saying a beautiful, simple sentence, not simplistically, and avoid the traps, which I hope my advices would help the student avoid. And then the most important, to see the student play better than yourself. What a reward. That's the selflessness, serving the muse. Generations before and generations after will, and we also. Authenticity is not the only thing that matters. It's also to be authentic to one's own musical instinct, harnessed with knowledge but not erased. I respect too much the students to overimpose. I rather shape their own endeavor into the piece rather than make them play mine or how I like it at this point, regardless that I have more flying hours than them, because we in fact always very young in front of the piece, even if we think we have wisdom and experience. That's the true respect and true openness, to adjust, to adapt, to hear what each student finds in the piece that you didn't. Might be a detail or might be a general idea, but to remain open-minded, humble, while firm in your beliefs. It's not incompatible. I trust the piece I play, and I trust my students' intelligence and intuition.